what is the importance of Diqduq, and how does that change the way we would understand Psukim?
Yeah. So, imagine for a moment that we're looking at physics and we're trying to understand some ideas in physics, and oftentimes these ideas cannot be expressed in human language. They can only be expressed in the language of mathematics. So you have the scientist or the physicist. He's going to write, let's say, the particular mathematical equations of the general theory of relativity, and he's not careful. Instead of writing the number 119, he writes the number 120, right? And instead of writing, to the raised to the third power, he writes raised to the fourth power. Very minor, little imprecisions. Well, I mean, we all understand that these imprecisions in the mathematical equation will completely throw the entire equation off skew, and it would be of little value at that point, because if you don't have the precise numbers, the particular principle that's being expressed by those numbers will no longer be expressed properly or be expressed at all. So if you said E equals MC cubed instead of E equals MC squared, well, it's just a little change there. We're talking about the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second. That you have just this little change instead of squared, cubed. Of course, it's a huge change, right? We all understand that. But it's that type of sloppy thinking that we would not tolerate in the realm of science, not because we're mean, it's just because we want to understand what is the principle that the scientist was trying to convey to us. So obviously, you need to know mathematics precisely. Okay. Similarly, we take the Torah, when God spoke to the Jewish people, he spoke to us in human language. Why? Subject for a different discussion, I suppose. But God chose human language as the medium through which to express his message to Am Yisrael. And when God speaks, right, we have to take those words seriously and precisely. And if we're going to start being sloppy, it's not just a question of, oh, we're sloppy and okay, not such a big deal. Okay, why does it matter? Well, it does matter, because we want to understand what it is that God wants to tell us, and we don't want to misconstrue that message, right? So the foundation is Diqduq. It's not just Diqduq, it's linguistics, it's understanding language, it's having a sensitivity to language, right? And taking the words seriously. Now, I'm not discounting the possibility of derasha, of course. The Chachamim say, Shivarim Panim La Torah, so that's fine. But the foundation, the starting point of any dialogue surrounding the text of the Torah Shebichtav, the starting point has to be, what are the words saying? What is the proper understanding of the words? And from there you can say, oh, well, there are certain nuances here, and those nuances point out in a certain direction. Go ahead, make a derasha. But you need to have the starting point. And the starting point is a precise understanding and sensitivity to language.
So it's in a way respecting the text, and also when it comes to drasha, it has to kind of build off of the established Diqduq and the established precise understanding. You can take it further, but if you're just doing drashot, just changing up words and their meanings, that's already, that would be out of bounds in a way.
Yes, I mean, there was, I studied ta'amim when I was young. My father, alav shalom, brought me a Mickey Carey, alav shalom, to teach me ta'amim. And, Mickey Carey is one of the great teachers of ta'amim, in my opinion, because he loved the text. And let me explain what I mean. If you made a mistake reading, he wouldn't be upset at you personally, why you're not good enough, why you're not precise enough, why you're not, doing what you're supposed to do. It was almost like, why are you doing this to God's words? I remember once Mickey was sitting in the synagogue and I was giving a halakha yomit many, many years ago. And this was in Bet Torah in Brooklyn. And we were studying, and we started talking about the importance of pronunciation and pronouncing the Kriyat Shema properly, pronouncing the words properly. And Mickey was there and said, I have to say something, Rabbi. I said, of course, please. He was my teacher, since I'm a little boy, he taught me how to read Talmud. So of course, my father taught me how to read Talmud, but he brought Mickey in. So he says, and like Mickey had a way of talking. He said, can you imagine opening up the newspaper, you're opening up the New York Post, and you start reading the words on the newspaper. Would you read them incorrectly? Would you do that? No, you read the words correctly. It's a newspaper, and still you show the proper respect to language, the proper respect to the journalist who wrote the article. So you're not going to say the New York Giants. You're going to say the New York Giants, right? Because it would be disrespectful to say anything else. It would be ludicrous. He says, how can you open up the Torah? The Torah is God speaking to us every day. How can you mispronounce the words? That's Mickey. And I got to say, that message, I think, is one of the greatest messages. In terms of, we don't want to treat God, chas v'shalom, God's words, less than we would treat the words of any newspaper, right? So when we speak, if I was to, sometimes people speak and somebody makes a mistake, and naturally somebody else, you meant to say this, right? Oh, I'm sorry, you correct yourself, right. Or sometimes naturally you correct yourself. So why should we hold God's words to a lower standard than we would hold our own speech? Well, of course we shouldn't, right? And that's why peshat is the starting point. Again, if you're looking at a literary composition, there's a peshat. You got to first read it. You can take it into different directions. You can give it certain interpretations. The reader and the text are always going to interact, of course. But you have to understand the words. If you don't understand the words, then there's no basis for that interaction between reader and text. There can be no possibility of darasha unless you first have the foundation of the peshat.
Baseline. Very nice. Okay, so while we're still on the topic of peshat, your father in his books talks about the concept of peshat being sensus communis. We wanted to know if you can elaborate on what that means, and if you can kind of just explain the idea of sensus communis and how that relates to peshat.
Yeah, that's a little difficult. I'll tell you why. It's a little difficult in the modern context. Of course, sensus communis means there was a meaning to the text, shenit pashet. So the peshat is that meaning that was conventionally accepted among the Jewish people. I'll give you an example. Ukshartam leot al yadecha. Ukshartam leot al yadecha. We know the peshat of ot is not letter, right, or miracle. Ukshartam leot al yadecha. The meaning that has shenit pashet, the peshat, is tefillin, right? And there's a lot of peshat in the Torah, and the way the peshat was expressed by the community was in the reading of the Targum. So the purpose of the reading of the Targum, so first of all, there's a personal mitzvah shenai mikra ve'achad Targum, right? Because the Targum represents the peshat of the Pesukim. And by peshat, we don't mean, this is the dictionary meaning. It may not be the dictionary meaning. This is the way we understand that word. This is the way we understand that pasuk. So the problem today with peshat, and also, by the way, and actually just continuing that or finishing the previous point, and they also would read the Targum in the Knis. So when they would read the Targum in the Knis, the Koreh, but Torah, would say the pasuk, and then the Metargem would say the Targum with the pasuk. It was that way. It was a Kahal's way of saying, this is our understanding of the pasuk, right? That's the peshat. So you have the Mikra and you have the Targum. Today, this is an odd notion. I would even say a foreign notion. Because today, we live in a society where there is no interest in text. Where we among the Greek philosophers, were very derisive of the written word. My father writes about this quite extensively. There's an article called, I think, God and the Art of Writing. And an article of mine is coming out now in Chakira. I think it's going to be the February journal. In Chakira, where I deal with this very issue, how among the Greeks, writing was looked down upon because the words were considered a tool to convey a message. And once the word conveyed the message, there is no need to have the word anymore. The word just obscures things. You have the message, that's it, you got it. That's Greek thinking. Among the Jews, the text itself has its own existence. It's a permanent existence because it's always generating meaning in the mind of the reader. And it's important to understand that for this to happen, for there to be a sensus communis, right? For there to be a peshat, there has to be a direct interaction between the reader and the text. Here's the problem. We no longer look at the text independently. I'll give you an example. When Rashi used to study Chumash, Rashi didn't use Perush Rashi. I consider Rashi to be one of the greatest Perushim on the Chumash. I love it. I think it's an amazing Perush. But Rashi didn't use Rashi as a substitute for the Chumash. Rashi actually read the Pesukim in the Chumash, interacted with the words, understood the words, and he saw what the Chachamim said, and he brought magnificent Perushim on the Pasuk from Sifrei, from Midrash Rabbah, from Midrash Rabbah. But we don't do that anymore. We look at the Mefarshim.
Yeah.
This Mefarsh says this. The Schoenstein says this. Hertz says this. Rashi says this. We very rarely open up the Chumash and look at the words and try to understand it. Try to understand the words, right? We don't even have the tools to do that anymore, right? The tools are there, of course. I mean, you have Sefer Rashim V'Varadak, you have Sefer Rashim Rabbeinu Yonah Minjanach. We have the tools. We have the Targum Ankelos. We have the ability to understand, but we don't. Rashi says this. Ibn Ezra says this. He says that. The other says this. Open up the pasuk and read the pasuk and understand the words that you're reading. If you can't understand the words that you're reading in your mind, there's something very wrong with the reader. It's sad, but this is where we are. So today when we talk about sensus communis, I don't even say we can have a sensus communis, but very few people actually read the text. The possibility of sensus communis implies a reading public. And at a certain level today, we don't have a reading public to a certain extent. Perhaps there are many who do read, but I'm looking at the mega picture, at the larger picture in general, and that's what I see.
Fascinating.